The Moton Mailbag is brought to you by the Robert Russo Moton Museum, located in Farmville, Virginia. The Moton Museum is a civil rights museum focusing on the history of Prince Edward County between 1951 and 1964.
This is season 2, episode 9 of the Moton Mailbag.
I'm Irene.
And I'm Leah. Hey guys, how you doing?
It's finally the weekend.
Yeah, it's exciting for Friday. It's like, what are you gonna do tomorrow? I don't know.
Not a thing.
Sleeping,
Eating.
straightening the house up.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you should probably sweep the floor. I'm like, yeah, I guess.
Maybe.
I know. Just like,
Maybe. We'll see.
Okay, Carl. Okay, you guys ready for our opening question?
Oh,
Sure.
yes.
What is something you look forward to in holidays?
So, my initial response
Okay.
is presents. You know, because
Presents are nice.
my
Give me
birthday and Christmas
Mhm.
and Hanukkah, you know, my family celebrates both, so it's like presents. But the non-selfish part of me
Look at you.
also very much enjoys the lights. I find little
You
things-
too?
Yeah.
That's my answer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I love lights. I think they're amazing.
What kind of lights?
All of them,
All-
especially
yeah.
tacky.
Tacky lights, house lights, store lights.
Okay,
Driving downtown with the lights on the light post lights.
what constitutes a tacky light?
Multicolored light bulbs.
Mm-hmm.
How's that tacky, though?
It is.
When they're like over excessive.
But what is over excessive?
Well, I need
Too
to factor
many.
in. I enjoy.
Canaan
How
style.
Like candlelight.
What's too many? Like, I like all lights. Like, I like lights. That's not my answer, though. Like, I like lights. Like, but, like, what constitutes a tacky? Like, when do you cross the line from being festive to tacky?
Ugh, there's
When
a difference.
it's like when it's just
Oh, well, there it is. I think all
bright. When it stops like
And I think I have to factor in for me, like, the holidays do the most for me. It's like you're doing too much.
Mhm.
But some people, like, tacky light tours, I know what I'm signing up for.
exactly.
I'm opting into some wild designs. Which
Yeah.
are beautiful, and it's like, you took how much time to do that, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, exactly.
But-
like if you could be considered on a tacky light tour,
Yeah.
that's
I guess my thing is tacky is usually implied to be bad, but like
Yeah.
lights are implied to be pretty good. And so I'm like, maybe tacky is just not the best word to use,
Conflict?
but it's just the word that we use.
extravagant.
Yeah.
That would be a better word.
That could-
I like that.
Extravagant. I'm trying to expand my vocabulary.
Look at you.
Fair enough.
Excellent.
So
Because a lot of people go all out with
Mhm.
lights.
Oh yeah.
And then I love a theme.
Oh yeah.
So themes are exciting for me. But, you know, also like colonial Christmas, so you gotta factor that in too.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So
Lights are nice. I just like eating. I mean, that's just the end of
That's
it.
fair.
Presents are nice.
That's fair.
Lights are nice. Being with family, you know, might look a little different this year.
Yeah.
Think outside the box, but you know, eating
Christmas.
is ever present.
Mm-hmm.
snacks.
Never letting me down.
So for the first question, so as a college student, you know, I hear these terms being used a lot of the time, and you know, for the most part, I have an understanding of what they mean. But I also know that there's a lot more to it than what's on the surface. So what is an HBCU, a PWI, and an MSI?
Then you want to start? You want me to start?
I'll start. So a HBCU is a historically black college or university. Typically, these institutions were created during when segregation.
Mm-hmm.
So these were black only institutions because black students couldn't go anywhere else. Obviously, Brown v. Board is what we talk about here, but we talk about, like, to get to Brown, there are a whole bunch of court cases about school desegregation on, like, university style levels. Like, I remember there's a law school, and the idea was build a whole new law school for this one black student, or just let him go to that school.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the NAACP court cases about it. PWI is a predominantly white institution. MSI, know a little bit, not a lot. So a minority serving institution. So there's like a significant number of minority students.
Yeah, there's like a million colleges in the U.S., right? And which is the context in which we use these. I mean, there are not a tremendous amount of HBCUs. You know, there's a decent amount, almost one per state. But there are quite a few states that don't have any HBCUs. But kind of like Leah was saying, I mean, there's the only place that African Americans could go for a very long time. And there is a statistic, and I think Irene, you might have looked this up earlier even too, but it was something like African Americans, only 25% of African Americans, something like that, who go to college go to HBCUs, but HBCUs grant 50% of the degrees for African Americans who graduate undergraduate college degrees, which is just absolutely staggering, but it speaks to the importance of what HBCUs are. And really their ability to serve populations in which maybe a PWI doesn't. Now PWI, which is most colleges, just if you reflect the demographics of the United States towards colleges, I mean it makes sense, right? So a PWI is a predominantly white institution, and then MSI is something it's fairly new-ish. I mean, it's not a term that's been around certainly as long as PWI or HBCU, but minority serving institution is a college that I think the threshold is 40% diverse population, so it doesn't have to be any set race, ethnicity, but if you have up to 40% of your undergraduate population who is diverse, and I'm using air quotes, then you can be considered an MSI. And it's just a different distinction. It opens you up to different types of funding and things like that. And I think as time goes on, we get more research and more, observe more what happens at MSI, we can start to see some difference. But just from my opinion and research, and we talked about this kind of in my grad program last year, years ago. I think for right now, I mean MSI tends to lean more towards operationally PWI than HBCU. I do think as the national U.S. kind of demographics start to shift, which are shifting more diverse as the days go on, more PWIs will become MSIs, which means their operations will start shifting more towards, hey, we need to do what's best for all of our students. We need to serve all of our students as opposed to, just serving who's the majority, because then it won't be a majority, right? There'll just be groups of people and populations. So yeah.
Look, correct me if I'm wrong, but for HBCUs, there's a certain year where they either had to have been established or at the time, or by this year threshold, they were to be considered an HBCU. They still had to be for Black students only.
That sounds like something that would exist just to get. I mean, because HBCU is as much as a designation as anything else, I think, right? Like historically Black. There's a reason they didn't call you a PBCU, predominantly Black.
That does make sense if you factor in the historical part of it.
That makes some degree of sense. And here in Virginia, we've got, how many do we have in Virginia?
A lot.
Got Hampton
State, Virginia State, Norfolk State, Union.
Yeah.
Mental map of Virginia.
I hope we're not forgetting anybody, and they add us in the comments or something. We apologize if we do. We're just the region we're located in. Those are the ones that are closest to us. Hampton is in our sports district for Longwood, and then Virginia State, Norfolk State, and Union. Well, Virginia State and Norfolk State are an hour drive away from us roughly, and Norfolk is only about 2 hours. So it's a geographic bias. So if there are any others, please don't hold it against us. So speaking of terminology and categories, our next question deals with just that, except talking about people. So colored, Negro, Black, person of color, BIPOC or Black Indigenous person of color. Where do the terminology come from, and who gets to decide who gets to be called what is essentially the nature of the question. So this is going to be an interesting one. I don't know who wants to get us started there.
I'll start. Okay, so with the term colored, it's always like interesting. People occasionally use it now. It's like, we don't say that. You don't say that. That's not what you're supposed to say. But then Martha Forrester on the Council of Colored Women. So it's like, language change over time. How some terms were used, some by black people, people of color, but then they were rejected or changed. So then with the 19 teens and 20s, the new Negro movement, for me, it's always a shock to read the word Negro because I've always associated something bad because that's typically, historically, how I've read it.
Right.
But from black people using the term and how the new Negro is, after World War I, the mentality change of like, no, we're citizens. We need to get this going, act accordingly, and the value of blackness found in the arts and whatever they're created. But it's like a weird space of, is that all right to use? Like, can we say that? And then we get to like black, I think the pro-black movement, but then Black/African American, because I mean it's not listed here, but that's part of what I associate with it as well. And then POC, I cannot tell you the number of times I've saw people express on Facebook, social media, tweeting, or just saying outright, if you mean black, say black. Don't erase their blackness because you're uncomfortable. Yeah. So you say people of color, person of color. And then with BIPOC, that term, I was like, what does that even mean? I think I remember last year, I was like, what is that? So it's a new term.
I didn't hear it till this year.
Yeah.
And I was just like, who?
What?
Yeah.
So I know, Kanan, you and I, we discussed it for a little bit, but the terms, some are created based on what's happening in social movements, but what somebody says about themselves or how they self-identify, that's personal. So it's like a weird mix of the social expectation, social reality, and personal.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, language evolves all the time, right? And I think African Americans and black people in particular, there's just often just this kind of cycle of, here's the word that we're called, here's kind of the phase of black people taking it back per se, or like changing it to fit our own purposes. I mean, there's countless examples of that. The biggest elephant in the room I won't even go into, but you know, certainly there's kind of phases of this happening, and you know, and Negro or black or whatever. I mean, but person of color was the first kind of pivot, I feel like. So like being black and blackness, I feel like something that is and was created by black people for black people is the first term of that type. And then person of color, although the intention is to be
inclusive,
politically correct, like you know, talk about minorities more broadly, but like, you know, but to Lee's point earlier too, like if you know they're black, say black, right? But like, I think what we should do a better job to teaching people is like, is it necessary, right? Like, what does this add to the, like, unless you're working in like police dispatch, and that's like a whole nother like issue, like you know, in terms of like profiling, but like you know, why it wasn't important for me to in this statement say that this is a brown person. Like, does it improve the quality of the sentence? Like, does it like, or you're just curious? Because if you're just curious, like that's just like you're teaching people they have a right to know because they're curious,
right?
Yeah.
And you don't. Like, if I see a person and I don't know how they identify, I just don't know, right? And like, and I don't. No matter how curious I am, doesn't give me a right just to know. And I feel like person of color was like, okay, well, obviously your skin is brown, so I'm just gonna call you a person of color because you have color. I don't know what that color is, but like at the same time, that, you know, is politically correct, I guess, per se, but also erases so much of, you know, or what if you're like white but tan? Like, there's just so many variables in this that, you know, or what if you're just really light skinned but black? Like, there's just so many like question marks around it, and intention's good, but the impact is erasure. And BIPOC, like I said, the first time I heard that was this year. I was just like, okay, so is this what we're doing now? Like, I don't know. Like,
wait, what?
Is this what we're calling it?
I missed
like,
the gathering. We covered
it's
that.
always best, rule of thumb, just to call people what they prefer to be called, or just call them nothing. Because if you wade into the water and guess or assume, like odds are, because I know elderly African American folks who don't want to be called black, right? Black as a race, African Americans as ethnicity is not the same thing, but you know, some people prefer. I'm sure there are black people out there who still prefer to be called Negro or colored or whatever, right? Like, it's just at the end of the day, you know, call people what they want to be called, or don't call them nothing.
Maybe their name.
Yep.
Their name.
That would be a good start.
That was appropriate.
You know?
Their name. Yeah.
And I think, you know, also thinking like POC and BIPOC, like think about there's so much intersectionality.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Hispanic and Asian, or
Right.
Hispanic and Black, or Black and Asian, Black and Hispanic. There's so
Right.
many different ways that someone can present, and so many different background ethnicities they can have.
Exactly.
You know,
Well,
so,
biracial intersectionality, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody, nobody's 100% anything,
Anything.
Yeah.
right? You taking these ancestry tests, and it's like, oh, I'm from where? You know, I thought I was from here. Like, oh, there's some Nigeria, here's some Uganda, oh, here's some Wales, here's some Ireland,
Yeah.
here's some, you know, Northwestern Europe. Like, there's all kind of stuff. Like, you know,
Yeah.
there's no like purebred people. So it's just like,
Yeah.
who, you know, why do we want to make somebody pick and choose which identities they want to claim and which ones they
Yeah.
don't? Like, we're all intersectional beings with a lot of different identities that we carry at once. And whether you're talking about native, right? Like, what do we say, Native American? Do we say indigenous? Do we say the tribe? Like, you know, call people, like, why do we necessarily need to define? Like, are you doing research, like, or something like that? Like, okay, that makes
that's-
some degree of sense. Or are you just
yeah.
curious? Like, because if you're just curious, like, curiosity killed the cat, right? Like, you don't just get to ask a no because you want to know.
yeah.
Or,
And that's,
yeah, go ahead.
you know, that it's always uncomfortable because it's like, what box can I put you in conveniently? And then brush off whatever, because your perception, your opinion, your thoughts doesn't matter. What matters is, because I know you're this box,
Right.
you represent this box, and your opinions are this box's opinions. You don't get to be individual because you are the collective.
Yeah.
Right.
And
It's
I think,
gross.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge, you know, want to not complicate things. So instead of saying
Yeah.
the Asian
It's lazy.
community, the Latinx community, the Black community, you know, community X, community Y, and community Z, you know, saying like these issues affect A, B, C, D, E, instead of just like, so we say umbrella it, and then so we said POC, you know, this
Right.
issue affects people of color. Like, well, okay, you know, sure, but we can also talk about it,
Yeah.
you know.
Which communities of color? Because there are
Yeah.
a lot.
Multiple.
You know, I'm
Yeah.
sure
Multiple.
the very specific, you know, subset of people of color here are
Yeah.
not at all perfected, and if
Yeah.
nothing other than geographic
Yeah.
region or, you know, population
Socioeconomic
size.
status.
Right.
You know, there's so many different things, you know, but people are complicated,
Aren't they?
you know, and I think,
Aren't
and
they?
it's,
Yeah.
I mean, it is a work in progress, you know, we're trying to figure out how to use rhetoric in the best way possible.
And it's like, for me, it's a struggle to not have people be othered,
Yeah.
and then to make the space, the conscious space for somebody to share, if they would like to share, to share.
Sure.
Otherwise, they don't need to. That's personal.
Yeah.
Not everything needs to be on display.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of adjacent, I think, but like, you know, Irene is a Spanish minor, and I know Leah has foreign language experience, and I took French, which I use for nothing, but it does make me, it's interesting seeing how people from different language speaking cultures, and America, you know, the U.S. doesn't have doesn't have a recognized language, but primarily a lot of folks speak English, but thinking about like French or Spanish in particular with so many kind of like verbs that are gendered, like how folks are now kind of like, okay, well, how do we, you know, I thought a lot about that with like the Latinx, which was you know, Latino, Latina, which you know, which is like what, you know, what do we, you know, so you know, I think a lot about how that language in that way evolves too, and it's like, well, okay, well, this might have been the case back then when there were only two boxes, but now we realize that really even back then there weren't two. It's just kind of like
That was what was
people are
recognized.
just people. It's just what was socially acceptable and you know, approved of at that time. So yeah, I think that was pretty good conversation about
I'd
that
say
one.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had quite a range.
Yeah.
All right, guys, last question. Which aspect of African American culture interests you the most?
So for me, that's definitely style and beauty, you know, fashion, hair, makeup, you know, how do Black women and African American women represent their identity through their appearance, you know. I find it so interesting, you know, the many different hairstyles, and I know one issue that's being talked about recently in the makeup community is foundation shades for Black women. You know, when I go to the store to buy foundation, I don't have to worry about being able to find a shade that doesn't match my skin tone. But a lot of Black women do. You know, a lot of companies don't produce the shade range for black women. You know, it's black women are more than just 5 shades.
And like from experience, I was in a wedding this summer, social distance, real small.
Sure.
But I had to get foundation.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know what shade I am.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to one of our colleagues. And I was like, please help me. I don't know how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So then, of course, we went through and found like the shade match kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I felt equipped, but also I went to an expert because I did not know where to even start the conversation.
Yeah.
Like, am I warm or am I cool? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I have since learned I am a warm tone.
Oh.
Yes. Very important.
Very fun.
You know, it's just...
Yeah.
And then to go off of that, like with the appearance, you have to factor in the Western model of expectation.
Yeah.
Like, do you want a job? Will you do these things?
Yeah.
So.
Tie your hair this way, dress this way.
Yeah.
It's just like, well, this isn't me, like, or my culture. Like, it's not really inclusive. It's not very. Yeah.
What's the act that was passed here for hair?
Oh.
Is it the hair law?
I know what you're talking about. I don't know the name of it. But
either way, there was in Virginia an act that was passed that women were allowed to just wear their hair the way their hair grows on their head. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
You know, and I think, you know, the haircut someone has, you know, the clothing they choose to wear, it's, you know, the makeup they decide to wear or not wear, it's, you know, so much of how we decide to show our personality is based off of, you know, like what we put onto our body. And I just find it so interesting that just the different styles.
Yeah. Individuals.
Yeah.
Reinforces not monolithic.
Yeah, exactly, you know.
Kanan, do you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, I guess it's not like, it's not specific to African American culture, I guess just like what I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I'm not just this is a rabbit hole I'm not necessarily trying to go down, but like the socialization of attraction, like, and what that looks like, and like how much like nature versus nurture depends on who is attracted to whom, right? And what that looks like, you know, people who might have an interest in only dating somebody of a certain race, and it's just like, well, why is that, right? Is that just because that's what you're interested in, or is that because of the negative media attention towards African American people, right? Like, if you're conditioned so much to believe that this color is associated with these negative traits, well, yeah, of course it's going to impact your other ways and views upon how you see and view somebody, right? Romantically or otherwise. But I don't know, it's something I've been thinking a lot of lately. It would make a great doctoral dissertation topic if anybody wants to pick that up. I am not, because that's not what I want to do professionally. But yeah, I think a lot about, you know, just kind of the psychology of racism and how that impacts things that we don't think about, right? Such as maybe romantic interests, and how media bias and everything like that might impact that as well. So that inherently is about African American culture, but also it's not.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just something that's interesting I think about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to even go off of that, one of my answers for this was literature, like how people write their work. Y'all know I love me some Baldwin.
Yeah.
And his perception of what the U.S. is, who he himself is, who he is as a black man, like, and then, you know, Toni Morrison has me all confused, but I'm still with her. You know, it's like how we as black people write about ourselves, what we portray. What we see as important versus what somebody perceives as important and tells us is important about us. So just the agency to reflect on ourselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and I think it ties with Irene's point a little bit, which I didn't know she was going to say that, so that works out great. But like, just what is beauty, right? Like, beauty is subjective, right? And like,
beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Right.
And I think like this year, Michael B. Jordan was voted the sexiest man alive or something like that. So I'm pretty sure like, he's probably one of how many black men who've been, so like, as opposed to whoever, I'm not going to name anybody specific because I don't want nobody at me, but like who's won it 5, 6, 7, 8 times. It was like, were there no black men before this year or Latinx men who who are sexy
Surprise.
enough to be this. Like maybe we shouldn't just be doing this in general, but like that's neither here nor there. But like what is beauty? Who gets to be beautiful? Like what is beauty, right? And it's so often associated with a certain thing that not all people can be. Like even within that race, if it's associated with certain race, right? Like not even everybody within the white race can be a size 0 and whatever else. Like it's just like there's so much that goes into it that we should. Representation matters is the long and the short of it, and we should do a better job with representing people of all different type of diversities, size, shape, race, age, neurodiversity. Like we should do a better job in general of representing all people and not just some.
Yeah.
I mean, because that shows the real us, like the real people versus this is a cookie cutter, and everybody's like this, except not at all, ever. Yeah.
Did you already answer? Did you? Or was yours kind of
it blended in beautifully. It blended in.
Beautifully.
Yeah. We can talk about music.
Beauty.
This question might as well have been that because that's basically what we talked about.
But I mean, it's important to address like black people are beautiful.
Yeah.
Like that's period.
Yeah.
It's not a question. Like yes.
So yeah, I think that's a pretty good conversation. What do you all think?
Yeah, I agree.
Alrighty, well, this is episode 9. That means we've got one more episode coming to you next week. Email info@motonmuseum.org or DM us on social media for your questions. Even if they don't make it to next week's episode, we can add them into season 3, which is to be determined.
Yay!
So thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye. Guys.